Smokey Robinson was not the clean-cut Motown gentleman you grew up idolizing. Behind that smooth falsetto and legendary smile was a man knee-deep in mess. We're talking secret affairs, hidden children, legal wars with his ex-wife, and a cocaine addiction that nearly turned him into a ghost. Oh, and that whole Motown royalty image? It was carefully crafted, but not always real. Let's get into it. While he was married to Claudette Rogers, his own bandmate, Smokey was creeping around with Diana Ross. Yes, the Diana Ross. And we're not talking about rumors. Smokey himself admitted it, decades later, but still, he said it happened. And that's just one piece of the puzzle, because soon after, boom, another scandal. A child born outside his marriage. Claudette warned him early in the relationship. No babies, no diseases. He brought home one of the two, and that was the end. The marriage fell apart, his image started cracking, and the man who wrote the tracks of my tears was suddenly the one living them. Then came the addiction, the weight loss, the vanishing act, and the mystery church lady who claimed she saved his life with a prayer. Sounds like a movie, right? But the drama didn't stop there. Years after the divorce, his ex-wife came back for the songs. Literally. She sued him for millions, claiming half of his catalog was legally hers under California law. And just when you thought the legacy was settled, Smokey got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame without the Miracles, the very group that made him famous. So the question is, how did Smokey Robinson pull off one of the greatest image flips in music history? And how many people got erased in the process? Let's break it all down. From the outside looking in, Smokey Robinson had it all. The voice, the looks, the suits, the charm, and that flawless Motown polish that made him the poster boy for respectable black success in the 1960s. He wasn't just part of the machine, he was Berry Gordy's golden boy. And that meant his image? It had to be bulletproof. Motown didn't just sell music, they sold aspiration, clean-cut crooners, glamorous girl groups, and perfectly choreographed dreams. And Smokey? He was the dream in human form, a soft-spoken songwriter with a silk voice, a smile that melted TV screens, and not a single public scandal, or so it seemed. But here's what fans didn't know. That polished persona was curated like a museum exhibit because Motown had strict rules, no drugs, no public drama, and definitely no messy personal lives. Berry Gordy wasn't about to let his artists destroy the brand, so whatever went down behind the scenes, it stayed behind the scenes. And Smokey, he played his part perfectly, for a while. He married Claudette Rogers, the only female member of the Miracles, and it was presented as the perfect union. Two beautiful singers, side by side, rising up together. But even that was more fragile than fans realized. Behind the smiles and harmonies, things were already starting to strain. Long tours, late studio nights, and cracks forming where the cameras couldn't see. And that's exactly how the illusion survived. Smokey wasn't loud. He wasn't wild like other stars. He was quietly chaotic, and that made it easier to miss. Because the truth is, the man who gave us love songs for decades, he was already breaking hearts behind the scenes, and it wouldn't take long before the truth started leaking out. Because the real Smokey, he wasn't just writing about temptation, he was living it. Now here's where the fairy tale really cracks. While Smokey Robinson was publicly married to Claudette Rogers, his bandmate, his day one, the woman who literally sang harmonies while raising their kids, he was sneaking around with Diana Ross. And we're not talking fan fiction or tabloid gossip here. Smokey admitted it, in his own words, in 2023. Decades later, sure. But the truth finally came out, and it was messy. This wasn't just some one-time studio fling. This was a long-term emotional affair, happening while Claudette was at home, off the road, taking care of their family. Meanwhile, Smokey and Diana were getting closer and closer in recording sessions, label meetings, rehearsals, you name it. They were signed by the same man, Berry Gordy, who reportedly also had a romantic history with Diana. So yeah, triangle anyone? And let's be real, people noticed. At Motown events, Diana and Smokey were always seated close. Always whispering, always lingering. Photos from the era show it plain as day, but nobody in the press said a word because Motown protected its image like it was a national secret. Behind closed doors, though, people knew. And here's the twist. Smokey later claimed he ended it because he realized he still loved Claudette. But by then, the damage was done. His marriage was already crumbling under the pressure of constant touring, fame, and now, infidelity. And let's not pretend Diana was just a side note. At the time, she was becoming Diana Ross, the solo powerhouse, the future icon. Smokey's closeness with her blurred not just personal lines, but professional ones. Motown was full of whispers, and Claudette, she had to live through that. With no headlines, no public sympathy, and a front row seat to the betrayal. It wasn't just a bad decision. It was a public secret, the kind everyone around them tiptoed around but never confronted. And once Smokey confirmed it decades later, the whole myth of Motown's perfect couple collapsed like a badly built set. But that wasn't even the final betrayal, because just when Claudette thought it couldn't get worse, Smokey brought home a bigger problem. So let's talk about the moment everything really fell apart. It wasn't just the Diana Ross affair that broke Claudette Rogers down. It was what came after. Because while Smokey was still legally married, still living under the same roof, still calling himself a husband, he fathered a child with another woman, a woman completely outside the music industry. Quiet, unknown, and very, very pregnant. Now here's where it gets even messier. Claudette had warned Smokey years earlier, don't bring home diseases and don't bring home babies. And what did he do? Exactly that. When he finally confessed that he had a child with someone else, Claudette kicked him out on the spot. And can you blame her? She had already endured decades of distance, late nights, whispered rumors, and the Diana drama. But this was the line. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was literal. There was no PR team, no spin, no saving the marriage. And here's the thing, this wasn't a young couple falling apart. Smokey and Claudette had been together for 27 years. That's 2 kids, multiple albums, endless tours, shared writing credits, and a bond that dated back before Smokey even had a record deal. She gave up touring to raise their family. She sacrificed her own career so he could shine. And now, he was walking out with a baby that wasn't hers and a legacy that she helped build. The divorce came in 1986. Quietly. No big headlines. No scandalous exposés. Just a dissolution of one of music's most iconic, but tragically one-sided partnerships. Smokey later said it was a turning point in every part of his life. Yeah, no kidding. The new child was never thrust into the spotlight, but the fallout was unavoidable. His home was broken, his reputation cracked, his rhythm gone. And that's when the decline started moving fast. Because Smokey wasn't just losing his marriage, he was about to lose himself. After the divorce, Smokey Robinson didn't just fall off, he vanished. Not from the charts, not from TV interviews, but from himself. Because behind the scenes, Smokey was unraveling. The smooth-talking, love-songwriting legend, he was now a 5'11" man weighing 120 pounds, wandering around LA with his pants literally pinned together by a safety pin because nothing fit anymore. And no, that's not a metaphor. He said it himself. This wasn't just grief. It was addiction, the kind that eats your identity, the kind that turns legends into ghosts. For most of his Motown run, Smokey had steered clear of hard drugs. He smoked weed, sure, but coke? That was a line he didn't cross. But after Claudette left, after the affair fallout, the love child scandal, the isolation, he gave in. And once he started, he didn't stop. Cocaine became the routine. Studio sessions disappeared. Business meetings, missed, songs, unwritten, tours, canceled or ghosted. He wasn't creating. He was collapsing. Friends noticed, but no one wanted to confront Motown's golden boy. Some thought he was just going through a rough patch. Others, especially those who'd been in that world, knew exactly what was happening. The weight loss, the silence, the sudden distance. Smokey was spiraling, and nobody knew how far down he was going until he told them years later. And then came the wildest twist of all. Smokey didn't go to rehab, didn't check into a clinic, didn't call a therapist. Instead, a complete stranger saved him. According to Smokey, a woman he'd never met, a minister, randomly contacted him and said, "God told me you were about to die." She said she'd been praying for him for a year, told him he was close to a stroke, told him everything he hadn't told anyone. And just like that, Smokey walked into her church high and walked out clean. No rehab, no relapse. He says it was divine intervention. One prayer, one decision, one miracle. Now, whether you believe that or not, here's what we do know. Smokey disappeared from the spotlight for years. Quietly, no albums, no headlines, just silence. While the world assumed he'd stepped away from music, he was actually crawling back from rock bottom. But even as he recovered, the drama wasn't over. Because the woman he hurt the most, she came back with lawyers, You thought it was over? Oh no, baby! Claudette wasn't done, and she didn't come back with a revenge album, she came back with a lawsuit. Fast forward to 2014, nearly 30 years after their divorce, and Claudette Rogers Robinson hit Smokey with legal papers that shook the foundation of his legacy. She wasn't suing for petty revenge. She was suing for millions. Why? Because Smokey had started reclaiming the copyrights to some of his biggest hits, thanks to a little-known clause in the 1976 Copyright Act. Under this law, artists could take back ownership of songs they wrote decades earlier, songs they had often signed away in unfair contracts when they were young and broke. Smokey used it. Smart move, right? Well, not so fast. Claudette said, "Hold up. Those songs? You wrote them while we were married, in California, which is a community property state. That means 50-50, honey." She wasn't claiming she co-wrote them. She was claiming them as marital assets. The hits, the royalties, the publishing rights, all of it. And that wasn't even the shady part. Claudette's legal team accused Smokey of breaking a previous settlement agreement from 1989, one that allegedly required him to protect her financial interest in anything tied to their time together in the Miracles. And now, decades later, he was allegedly cutting her out of massive new deals involving that same catalog. The lawsuit wasn't just about the money. It was about credit, recognition, respect. Claudette had given up her career for this man. She raised the kids. She stayed quiet during the cheating, the addiction, the secret baby. Now Smokey was rewriting history and cashing in alone. Her claims included breach of contract, constructive fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, anticipatory breach of contract, translation. She accused him of being shady with the money and the morals. Smokey's camp didn't hold back either. His lawyers argued that the reclaimed rights legally belonged only to the author. That's the law. They said it didn't matter who he was married to back then or who cooked dinner while he wrote Tracks of My Tears. The copyright law didn't recognize spouses or emotional labor. Harsh? Yeah. But legally airtight? That's debatable. The case never reached some dramatic courtroom climax, but what it exposed was way deeper than a royalty check. It revealed just how messy and unhealed their breakup really was. Decades after their split, Smokey and Claudette were still entangled, financially, musically, emotionally, and now, legally. But if you thought that was the biggest hit to Smokey's legacy, wait till you hear what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame did next, because that scandal was personal. All right. Let's talk about the betrayal that had fans, critics, and music historians clutching their pearls, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame scandal. Because what happened in 1987 wasn't just a snub, it was a slap in the face. Smokey Robinson was inducted as a solo artist. Solo, just him. No Miracles, no Claudette, no Pete Moore, no Bobby Rogers, no Ronnie White. The group that literally built Motown's foundation, the ones who recorded the hits, wrote the harmonies, and toured the South when it was still dangerous for black performers, they were left out. Erased. Let's be clear, the Miracles were not Smokey's backup singers. They were his partners. They co-wrote the music. They shaped the sound. They were Motown's first group to sell 1 million records. Shop around. You've Really Got a Hold on Me, The Tracks of My Tears. Those weren't solo joints. That was the group. That was history. But in 1987, the Hall of Fame only called one name, Smokey Robinson. The backlash was immediate. People were furious. Critics called it revisionist. Fans called it shameful. Journalists straight up said it was a historic oversight. And quietly, Smokey said nothing. He didn't push for the group to be added. He didn't reject the honor. He stood on that stage in Cleveland, accepted the trophy, and went home. Now maybe he had no control over it. Maybe it wasn't his call. But the silence, it said a lot. Pete Moore and Bobby Rogers later spoke out. They weren't angry. They were hurt. Claudette, still reeling from divorce in the later lawsuit, was being left out of music history in real time. Again. This wasn't just about legacy. This was about erasure from the very institution meant to preserve legacy. And here's the kicker. It took 24 years to fix it. The Hall of Fame finally inducted the Miracles as a group in 2012 without Bobby Rogers, who had died just before. Smokey attended the ceremony, gave a lovely speech, and called it an honor. But by then, the moment was gone. The damage, done. The group should have had that glory together in 1987 when they were still alive, still standing side by side. But instead, Smokey stood alone. And for many, that moment became the ultimate symbol of how fame can rewrite history, and how even legends can let silence speak louder than truth. But this wasn't the end of Smokey's heartbreak, because while his career kept moving, everyone around him didn't. By the time Smokey Robinson hit his 80s, he wasn't surrounded by music royalty anymore. He was surrounded by ghosts. The longer he lived, the more he lost. The golden age of Motown became a graveyard of memories. Marvin Gaye, shot and killed by his own father in 1984, just one day before his 45th birthday. And let's not forget, Marvin wasn't just a label mate. He was Smokey's brother in sound, the guy who'd call him late at night to sing melodies over the phone. That kind of bond? You don't replace it. Sam Cooke, gone even earlier, killed in 1964 under mysterious circumstances. Smokey was only 24, and Sam was one of his biggest idols. He admired how Sam owned his publishing, how he fought for his creative rights in an industry that swallowed black talent whole. His death hit Smokey hard and stayed with him for decades. Then came Pete Moore, Bobby Rogers, and Ronnie White, all original miracles. One by one, they passed away. These were the men who stood shoulder to shoulder with Smokey when they were just kids from Detroit, trying to sing their way out of poverty. Now, Smokey was the last one standing. Even Aretha Franklin, who he'd known since they were 8 years old, grew up with her, sang on her porch, called her his oldest friend, was gone by 2018. Smokey gave a heartbreaking tribute at her funeral, in front of presidents, fans, and world leaders. But he spoke like a boy from the block who just lost his sister. And then came the pandemic. In 2020, Smokey caught COVID-19 during one of its most dangerous waves. At 80 years old, he was in the high-risk zone. He thought it was just fatigue until he couldn't breathe. His oxygen levels dropped. He was rushed to the hospital and placed in total isolation. No visitors, no music, no family, just the silence of a hospital room and the terrifying realization that he might die alone. And the most terrifying part? Not death. It was the possibility of losing his voice. That falsetto, the one that had carried him through fame, addiction, divorce, lawsuits, and loss, was barely a whisper. He thought, this is it. This is how it ends. But Smokey recovered. Slowly. Quietly. Like always. And when he came back, he didn't have an album rollout. No splashy comeback tour. Just gratitude. Because while his world had changed, he was still here. But now, the question was, what would he really be remembered for? The voice? The hits? The scandals? Or the people he left behind on the way to becoming a legend? So, after all the smooth lyrics, the love ballads, the polished suits, and the polite interviews, who was Smokey Robinson really? Was he the genius songwriter who helped build Motown from a little Detroit house into a global empire? Was he the golden-voiced crooner who wrote timeless classics like Cruisin', The Tracks of My Tears, and You've Really Got a Hold on Me? Or was he the man behind the curtain? The one hiding addiction, heartbreak, betrayal, and quiet chaos under a velvet voice? The truth? He was all of it. Smokey Robinson's life wasn't some sanitized Hollywood biopic. It was raw, it was real, and it was messy. He cheated, he lied, he lost people, he got sued, he cracked under pressure, he relapsed on love, he broke up his own group without saying a word. And yet, he survived it all. As of now, Smokey Robinson is still alive, still performing, and still cashing those checks. His net worth is estimated around $150 million, and he's still considered one of the most prolific songwriters of all time. But what makes his story so fascinating isn't just the music. It's the myth he managed to maintain for so long, the illusion of perfection, and the fact that for decades, we all believed it. But look closer, and what you'll find is a man who watched his world burn down and kept singing through the smoke. He didn't just write the soundtrack to other people's love stories. He lived through the heartbreak, too. So when you hear that smooth falsetto floating through your speakers next time, remember, you're not just hearing a legend, you're hearing a survivor, one who made millions fall in love while quietly falling apart behind the scenes. And that's why Smokey Robinson will be remembered, not just as Motown's voice, but as its most complicated truth. Now, are we still pretending he was squeaky clean? Or are we finally ready to talk about the real Smokey? Because this man wasn't just a miracle, he was a storm in silk.